Welcome to Windows on the World, bringing you cutting-edge news, empowering information, and no conspiracy theories. On tonight's show. Okay, so today on Windows on the World, we're going to talk to JC about Job Centre corruption. And there's also a YouTube channel called Job Centre Corrupt, which JC runs. So, JC, welcome to Windows on the World.
Oh, thank you, Mark, and thank you for inviting me on. Thank you.
I found your videos extremely interesting and informative, but for people who may not know about your channel, can you just give us a bit of your background and how you started to interact with Job Centre Plus? Because you've been unemployed for some time, is that right?
Yeah, I've been unemployed for longer term unemployed, quite a long time, on and off for sort of 3, 4, going back 5 years now. How it came about is really things came to a head recently where my landlord's trying to evict me. And obviously I've beaten that, by the way, but I was tidying up and I have all this job centre stuff where I've been fighting off the job centre, and I had it all on the table and I thought, what shall I do with this? Shall I just have a big bonfire of this, or set fire to it? And then I suddenly got my tape measure out of the table and measured it. I thought, I've got half a metre of paperwork here of all the attempts they've tried, everything they've tried on, everything I've had to complain about. And I thought, really what I've got here is an ethnographic study of an abuse by a civil service department against its client that's supposed to be its customer, and they're supposed to be civil servants serving me. So I thought what I could do is break this down into the different consecutive parts and just make, say, short 15-minute YouTube videos of each part of the story, and then that will kind of be like an ethnographic record. I admit it might not be terribly interesting, but it's like a very niche product. But I thought it would just be a very interesting project to do. And of course, while I'm unemployed, I've got the time to do it and really show how the abuse took place, how the sort of misconduct in public office, because a whole raft of that took place. So that's why I thought, well, that's a good idea. I'm about halfway through the videos, so I thought I'll do that, and then I could do a few videos of tips of how to defend yourself against any onslaught. So that's how the channel came about. How I became unemployed. I was unemployed about 5 years ago. I was unfairly dismissed from a civil service department, and that was quite stressful and traumatic. And I'm getting on a bit, and I've got a couple of disability issues. And unfortunately, I live in a very rural location where there's not a lot of jobs. So despite sort of searching for jobs, I think there's a lot of ageism out there, with a couple of disability concerns as well. Haven't been able to find employment for a very long time. So I've been back and forward to the job centre. And I suppose the thing about me, Mark, is I'm a pretty reasonably intelligent guy, but I tend to follow up, and I tend to not be very good at not complaining, if you know what I mean. I started sort of seeing what's wrong with this system, how I could try and fix it. And actually, what I've been trying to do is not have a go at the job centre, but just trying to sort of complain and follow up in the early stages, trying to help them fix the problem. But of course, I've come to the conclusion it's pretty unfixable. But you can still try, and there's various ways to defend yourself. So that's how that sort of came about to start with. So would you like me to kick off with sort of a bit of the early parts of the story, as it were?
Well, yes, I find your channel extremely informative, and for people who are suffering at the hands of the DWP and Job Centre Plus in particular, I think it's a very, very good reference. But yes, carry on with that. That would be great.
Okay, well, I mean, I first, I mean, like everybody else, you go to the job centre and you, it's not a very pleasant experience. You're a bit sort of on the back foot, a bit down, um, and you tend to be a bit trusting that they know what they're doing and you're going to be handled properly. Now, it all started really with Flexible New Deal and the work program, and this comes into some of your recent videos with Agenda 21 because I'm quite an observant person, and I started to ask when this was all kicking off how this all fitted together and why it was happening, and I noticed that a lot of the control, this claim was supposed to be my claim, and I was supposed to be in control of it, and the locus of control is continually pulled away from you. So you feel as if you're powerless and you don't have any control over events and what's happening. Really, when it really kicked off for me, it was Flexible New Deal, which was,
For
and
people who
this is,
may not know about that, can you just explain what that is?
well, Flexible New Deal was the forerunner of the work program. So we're going back now to 2010, 2011. And this is where Serco, this sort of corporate entity, Serco, heard of, which does a lot of public service sort of intervening, as it were. So Serco were running it, and then Serco would farm out to local providers. And what happened here was you'd have provider one, and if they failed, provider two, provider three, and also an optional self-employment provider. So I was with provider number one, and you'll see that on my videos on my channel. That's where the story starts. And I basically had 14 weeks of having to very inconveniently go and sit with a bloke who did absolutely nothing and wouldn't help me at all. And it was very inconvenient on the day I was signing on, so I'd have to go and sign on, come home, go even further out afield to this guy on the top of a shop. And it was like literally sitting under a, if you said go and sit under a tree for 20 minutes, it was the same sort of help as that. So I'd had enough of it. Unbeknown to me, the job centre had loads of complaints but did nothing. So they knew nothing was being provided. So I started to complain and get rebuffed. What I didn't realise at the time is, as well, there's a data issue there in that your data is left on you're sort of on a cloud database, and that database, your information was shared between providers one, two, three, and the self-employment option. It was a rather strange experience with Serco. And to cut a long story short, with that, after complaining and then complaining to the job centre district office, I then had a sort of a conference call with the head honcho in the district office, and also somebody who's supposed to be from Serco, but that was a lie because they were actually somebody on secondment from the job centre, who then agreed I could go to the second provider and just have an informal chat. So there was an agreement there that, if they could offer me something, that would be fine, but if not, I didn't have to go with them. Well, what happened is they reneged on that, and then I started to get bullied by the second provider. Complaints, and it turns out they couldn't offer any help or support either. Now, this is quite interesting to me because, I've got a degree or two, and so all of this stuff was lowest common denominator stuff. So when you say, well, I've got a degree, or what help and support can you provide other on top of what I'm doing, they can't. They'll say, yes, we can provide bespoke support for this, or somebody with a degree or this kind of background or whatever. But when you investigate it, they can't. So this was a massive scam, really, by Serco on the taxpayer, with all these providers that couldn't actually provide anything at all.
I think you've just brought up something very interesting there, because this is what I hear from a lot of people. So you've got these corporate partners, basically, of the Job Centre Plus, and the stories that I've heard are wide-ranging, but most people say that these places are just a waste of their time. This seems to be the biggest complaint. But also, a few years ago, we looked into one of these service providers who'd sent somebody to a call centre, and they were meant to get paid. They didn't get paid, and the company that they'd been sent to work for were actually struck off by the Financial Services Authority. And so there
Yeah.
seems to be a lot of negligence, laziness, and basically corruption from what I've seen.
Well, the thing is, Mark, in the particular area I have, a lot of these companies, these sort of the end provider, were sort of seem to be like fly-by-night companies that didn't really exist. What it was, they'd put in for a tender. They'd actually got a lot of funding of taxpayers' money, so for rent on a room and computers and whatever. But what the thing that they didn't actually employ was any qualified recruitment person or specialist who could actually provide any help or support. So what you had is basically jumped up individuals who would then try and dictate to you, and basically that's where I started to twig. Hang on, you know, this isn't about me. This is about using my name as a profit unit for this scam. Um,
Absolutely.
and so my name was left on this database. I actually started getting into sort of data protection then and subject access requests, and I actually made an early subject access request and found sort of comments made by this guy, which were being and my data being shared between the providers, even though I hadn't actually signed up with them. So I had no contract with provider 2 and provider 3, but they had access to my data, and they were sort of thinking, oh, he'll be with us soon. How can we make a profit out of him? You know, so it's just stamping, using you as a profit unit. Now, so I sort of went all up the ladder with complaints on that, from Job Centre Plus to the Job Centre CEO in Caxton House in London, which actually doesn't exist.
Can you just
And then
expand on that a bit? Do you mean that it's actually not there and it's used as a mailing address?
well, the complaints. I've actually got a video on the sort of the complaints hierarchy. I mean, you complain to your job centre manager at the time, then you complain to the district office, and then if you don't like what they've done, I mean, they collude, by the way. There's no independence there. So then you complain to the CEO office. They keep changing the name of this, but it's basically the head honcho of Job Centre Plus, who originally was in Caxton House. Now, when I say they don't exist, what they do is they always just bat your complaint down to district level. So I've never had anything actually dealt with at the CEO level. And so then, if you want to take it further than that, it used to be the parliamentary ombudsman, or as it's known, the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman. But in order to get there, that has to be okayed by your local MP. Now, at the time, back then, in sort of 2010, 2011, and 2012, they'd actually started up a new, what's it called, arm's length body called ICE, the Independent Case Examiner, and that was set up literally to sort of try to deal with complaints, or so it seemed, before it got to the parliamentary ombudsman. But its real agenda was to stop complaints getting to the
I think you've
parliamentary
just brought
ombudsman.
up a very key point here about what I call a consensus society, the big
Yeah,
society, which, as you were stating, we've covered in Agenda 21, which is like a bigger part of that, which has now been renamed Agenda 2030, I think, when we're going to do some more shows on this. But to get back to that, it's very, very important that people know that they are not being allowed access to
yeah.
personnel who will properly consider a complaint.
No, you've covered this in earlier videos, Mark. I've noticed in that what's actually happened is redress is taken away. So within Job Centre Plus, you don't have any checks and balances. You don't have a proper hierarchy. It's just these different locations will collude with one another. And early on, again, I actually caught the Job Centre manager where I was at, sort of preparing the district office with an email, just basically outlining what I was going to complain about and how to disempower that complaint. So the whole focus is about disempowering the complaint, reframing the complaint for something simpler or something that can be got rid of. And nowhere better was this done in the independent case examiner. Um, Now, if I explain a bit about this was a completely, as far as I'm concerned, it's a completely bogus organisation, which is literally designed to sort of, derail any genuine complaint. And I think what they do, if it's cut and dry, they'll let a few complaints go through for PR purposes. But my by that time, I'd had about, I think I sort of got it down to about 10 elements of complaint, 10 main elements of complaint about this time leading up to 2012.
Can you just give
And
us just a rough idea of what those were?
I can't know because I think if you go on the Job Centre Corrupt YouTube channel, there's the very boring video. There's one on the Independent Case Examiner where you'll see. But basically, I mean, obviously the main one was the lack of provision by the flexible New Deal system.
Yes.
And the upshot of that was I actually had an email from the CEO of Serco, District Serco, saying, okay, Mr. So and so, we will fund bespoke provision for you. So, you've not been provided it, we'll pay for somebody else to provide it for you. Now, I've got that in writing, so you think, okay, well, I can get that. And then what they did was, I think it was the July 2012 or 2011, the flexible New Deal was going to end, and then all of a sudden they cut off contact. They're supposed to be liaising with me, and they just kicked it into the long grass, kept phoning up this CEO, and he kept being away in Manchester or something. So basically, they timed it out, and then they said, "Oh, flexible New Deal doesn't exist anymore, so we're not obligated." And I said, "Well, you are still obligated because you promised it me." So I never actually got any flexible New Deal provision of any kind. There was lots of other things, like I went for the self-employment option, and the guy, threatened me with a sanction, even though I wasn't with them at that time. I had an abusive call from the second provider. So all sorts of things were going on, complaints like that. So with the independent case examiner, I had 10 elements of complaint. What I got back was they were supposed to negotiate with you, but some idiot just wrote, and it looks like something written from a kindergarten. 4 elements of complaint, completely ridiculously disempowering the complaint. So I complained about that. And then what happened is I discovered that you only get 2 cracks at this, at deciding your elements of complaint with them, and then they will refuse to deal with you. And they don't actually advertise that. So there's an unknown agenda. So what actually happened was, I tried to nail it down and say, look, I've referenced all of this. I've given you a 100-page PDF. You can't back out of this. These are the elements of complaint. Lady said, well, I've just written them slightly differently. Can I show them to you? Okay, you can show them to. And then, of course, that's then recorded on your file. That's it. You either accept that or not. So then we had a letter tennis for another 6 months. We've suggested these, you either accept them or not. So in the end, even if I said, okay, I'll accept them if you can put in writing where mine fit into them, and so it's a complete, like your sort of similar sort of Delphi technique. They're telling you what they have decided, and you can agree with it or not. But if you don't, get lost.
Well, exactly. It's like when you get this kind of response. I'm sorry you feel that we have not dealt with your matter
Yeah.
correctly. However, I will not enter into any more correspondence.
So
This is the
exactly.
kind of thing, isn't it?
And then of course I took it to the parliamentary ombudsman, the MP, who sort of begrudgingly said yes at first. So we took it to them, and then I kept adding complaints as I went on into the work program system. And had problems with that. So I kept adding complaints, and then he suddenly decided to write me a nasty letter. Now, this was very interesting because I discovered later on with subject access requests that the guy in the independent case examiner had been colluding with a guy in the parliamentary ombudsman, again, to try and disempower the complaint. They're supposed to be independent of each other. So again, you're getting this system where you're set up to fail. They're trying to set it up to thwart any complaint and to fail. And then all of a sudden I get a letter from the MP saying, you've complained about everything you've been in touch with, basically. And if you see the video on that, I actually show his letter. So he's been colluding with them as well. So what you're getting is there's absolutely no independence, there's no checks and balances, and you have an organized system to try and rebut and disempower any complaint. Of course, it's counterproductive because nothing ever improves. It actually gets worse. So that system is all stitched up, and if you've got a serious complaint, the more serious it is, the more they'll try and stitch you up, Mark.
Oh, absolutely, and I can definitely resonate with that. What they're
About
doing is, sorry,
Yeah,
they're just removing remedy from the system
yeah,
at
yeah.
every level.
Well, I was very suspicious now with the flexible New Deal and, of course, the complaint system. So when we get to the work program, they try and get me on the work program, which is, again, this Agenda 21 type thing where what happened here, I mean, you've got companies like Working Links and A4E this time, not Serco, and they sectioned off the country into regions which suspiciously look very similar to the EU regions for our country.
I don't think there's
Uh,
any coincidence there.
no, no, not at all. And so you've got these corporate, again, these aren't real companies. They're sort of like networks who are sponsored for the tenders and then get the grants. And again, they then farm it out to a local fly-by-night provider, some of whom are the same, guess what, as were there for the flexible New Deal. So, but work program is very different in that they wanted you to hand over your data consent, and also basically I noticed that the locus of control was with them. So if you didn't do what they said, you would, they more or less had the power to sanction you, even though technically they didn't. If
Mm.
they said, well, you haven't got this, they'd recommend a sanction, and that would be rubber stamped. So that then switched over across the line, so they were then in charge. And of course they didn't employ any qualified recruitment specialists either. So you're then getting this sort of no carrot and total stick. Now, I have a bit of a funny story about the work program in that I was kind of on the run from the work program, or on the run from the job centre, because I thought while my complaint was at sort of the ICE and the parliamentary ombudsman stage, I would what I would do is there were two stages to this. I would move job centre to stop the claim and then do a rapid reclaim and start it. So I wasn't eligible for the work program appointment, and thereby hoping that I would get remedy from my complaint and I would get my provision. And I thought, well, I'm trying to save them money here, and I'm trying to save myself money. So I started moving job centre, and I think I moved job centre about 6 or 7 times. And if you think of the border between sort of England or Scotland or England and Wales, I was actually signing on in a different nation at one point. So that was quite funny. So I had this sort of on the run from the job centre for a while, and certainly signing on in a different nation seemed to confuse them for a bit. And then later I thought, well, I can't keep doing this. So I went back to the second job centre. It seemed a bit friendly. And then what I started to do, well, what they tried to do then was to, they would lie to me, just blatantly lie to me and say, well, you're off to the work programme now. You don't need to sign on. They'll do everything, which wasn't true because you've still got to sign on. So they would arrange a work program induction appointment for 3 hours at the same time that I was supposed to be signing on, so that they could close down my claim and just make trouble for me. So what was happening? There was a little cabal of three, four, 2, 3 people or 4 people, including I think the then manager, and I've got through a few managers, who were literally out to get me and trying to shut down my claim. So what I had to do then was to sign off before the appointment, so it therefore was nullified and didn't exist. And then I would do a rapid reclaim the day after it, so that I could continue my claim. And it was actually cheaper to lose the £10 JSA, rather than to face a sanction. So I did that. If you watch the video on that on the work program, it's quite funny. So with the changes and with that, I think I did that about 16, 17 times. So I was sort of like on the run, and then, on the run with my own claims. It was a ridiculous situation. And then eventually they just gave up. So I never did the work program either, because I didn't get previous remedy. And then you'll like this, Mark. They even tried to sanction me because I refused an appointment because they said the work program had ended. I now had to go to a different work coach, and they tried to sanction me because I said, well, I haven't done the work program. So that was a bit of entertainment. So I'd recommend that video if you want a bit of entertainment there.
Well, I think this stuff's incredibly important because people who are suffering like you have, and there are many, do need to know how to get some kind of remedy.
Yeah.
And it is totally ridiculous that the system works that way. But you and I know why the system works that way. What would you say to people out there who say, oh, this guy sounds like he's a bit of a troublemaker?
Well, all I was doing, Mark, was initially I was trying to seek remedy, and I discovered it was never going to be there because it was all a big stitch up. But then I discovered, well, the best, they try to get you on the back foot permanently, really, and I think it's just trying to get you under the thumb, to get you controlled, to get you acting in the way that they want to act, so that you can be a profit unit for their corporate chums that they're bringing in to take over the whole system.
Exactly.
What I would say though, with the sanctions, sort of the bogus sanctions regime, that was very interesting as well because I got sanctioned, or I would get these letters through saying a doubt has arisen on your claim, and I got very good at rebutting that and saying, you state a doubt has arisen on my claim, etc. This is untrue. You state this is untrue. And they would come at me with lots of sanction attempts, but with just generic, not specified stuff, hoping that I would just accept that I'd been sanctioned. But what I did was fight every sanction, um, and win ultimately. And this is something I want to make very clear, in that being sanctioned is not actually a bad thing, and I'll tell you why. Because they used to have the reconsideration process. Now they've got three stages, basically: mandatory reconsideration, appeals process, and then the tribunal. Well, the first two you want to do, but you don't want to take any notice of them. You just want to write something that is going to be for the tribunal. They used to do a reconsideration process, but they didn't used to admit it, and they used to hide it. But I found out about this, and you would request one, and they would have to reconsider it. And I think they made it mandatory because so many people were getting sanctioned. But guess what? Now they're using that as just a delay technique. So that's a waste of time. But do that, then do the appeal stage. That'll be an automatic no. But what I normally do is I just write one letter now. They don't sanction me now, by the way, but I write one letter saying I want a mandatory reconsideration. If that fails, consider this as the appeal. If that fails, consider this as the tribunal. And they know full well that I'm going all the way to tribunal. I want to go to the tribunal, and usually they drop it, or they don't even try it on in the first place. And the importance about the tribunal is that you're actually, this is very interesting as well, Mark, in that it can get very scary for people because you're going to a courthouse and you get your court papers and your court bundle, but it's not a court. A tribunal takes place in a courtroom, but for that tribunal, it's not a court. It's just a room, and it's done by a judge who's not a judge. Well, he is a judge, but he's acting as a chair, and he should be at the same level as you. So a tribunal is nothing to be afraid of because the judge hates all this stuff, has had loads of this bogus stuff. DWP won't turn up, and as long as it's for bogus reasons that they've sanctioned you, you'll win straight away. You just need to be quite organised about how you go about it, and I'll hopefully do a video about that in the future. But I've helped a few people now, but I can only talk about my own experience. So I've had a couple of these where a judge has profusely apologised for paperwork, and another one where he actually said, "Oh, Mr. So-and-so, I'm going to uphold your appeal," before I've even sat down and got my coat off. So as long as you write it with the judge in mind in a tribunal, and just do it on one or side of a piece of paper or two sides, that's all you have to do, and be prepared to defend yourself and take it to a tribunal. Everything before that is just BS, frankly, Mark.
I think that's great that you brought that up, because getting it into a higher level is
Yeah.
extremely
The
important
judge is the only person with who is independent.
and
He's
impartial.
and with a brain.
Yes.
And they've doing really serious court stuff. You know, I last one I went to is like immigration and family, and there was like people with really serious stuff going on. They get a job centre sanction tribunal. He comes down off the chair, he sits at the table. It's a tea break for him. He probably won't have read all the paperwork. You just say, you know, I had this judge jumping up and down saying, Mr. So-and-so, look, they're referring to stuff that wasn't even a law that wasn't even in place when they made this sanction. And he goes, this is rubbish. This is all, you know, this is all BS. And I turned to him and said, Judge, look, I've got 23 points here of why you should uphold. This is all bullshit. And the stenographer was laughing her head off as well. You know, I can't really put bullshit. And I was going, it's all bullshit. Look, this is bullshit. This is bull. You know, and she was like, well, I can't type that. And I was going to put, well, put incorrect then. You know, and it just turned into a big laugh in the end. You know, and people get very intimidated by this stuff. Don't get intimidated. Go and meet the judge. It will be you and the judge. He'll be friendly. It's a tea break for him. You know, and he hates this stuff because, you know, I was saying to the judge, look, this is obviously fraud, isn't it? Oh, yeah, it's definitely fraud. And this is fraud on a massive scale. The sanction stuff is just, you know, it's people going to the job centre. They're very trusting. They're very innocent. And they don't realise this sort of Luciferian lizard brain system is basically targeting them to save money. It's nothing personal. They just want to steal your money.
Yes, I think it's a really good place to have a little break here, but I just wanted to make this point as well, because that is extremely important what you've just said there, and everybody should take that on board. If you get your chance to put your information,
Yeah,
correct information, in front of a judge competently,
yeah,
these people will fall apart. And this goes for local authorities, it goes for the DWP, because they do not have the competence or the ability to represent themselves, and they haven't got the standing. That's the main point. They do not have standing in these matters because
no,
they have not prepared themselves. They are trying to commit a fraud, and the judge, as you said, openly said that. So I think this is great. You've found a remedy within
yeah,
this corruption that's going on, and it is corruption. I'm not saying that lightly. It's the removal of everyone's rights for a consensus society, and it's impoverishing people and
yeah.
taking away all of their human rights. So well done for that. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with JC Plus Corruption. JC from Job Centre Corrupt YouTube channel. Welcome back to Windows on the World. We're now going to go into data protection, subject access requests, and freedom of information.
Yeah. Okay, Mark. Well, this actually follows on from what you were asking about how you can protect yourself, and you know, because I think for me the big year was 2012, where they were just trying everything at me and throwing everything at me, and I'd researched and I'd learned about. I was pretty concerned about what happened with data protection previously, so I knew about subject access requests and freedom of information requests. And now most of our listeners will probably know what those are, but just in case they don't, a subject access request is basically via the Data Protection Act, you can ask for a copy of any data about you. And of course, I revealed some quite revealing things doing that. One of the things I wanted to say about that is I'll be doing a video about the different types of data protection, but there was a lot of caricaturing going on, particularly in this work program thing, when they were trying to get the me on the work program, and I was sort of signing on and signing off. And I noticed that the entries on the computer database, I think it's called the LMU database. This is where they make notes about you on each appointment. They were sort of caricaturing me as like a problem guy, you know, and they were actually giving instructions to the next person, you know, so and so seems to be avoiding the work program. Get him on the work program, and this sort of thing. I think it's covered in my the work program video. There's a little snippet of there, and this is quite revealing when you ask them for your data. But also, if they come at you with a sanction or something like that, it's actually very useful because of the Data Protection Act. Every public body needs to have a designated data controller. So there'll be a designated data controller for each Job Centre Plus district. So if I had a complaint or they were trying a sanction, as part of the response to that, where I'm asking them to document and verify an obligation, or they've stated something, you can say, well, you've stated about this A, B, C, and D. I would like to see the information about that. So you can make a subject access request. So what I would do is send in a complaint, and at the bottom, say you've alleged X, Y, Z. I want to see the information about it. I want to see the database. I want to know who did it. I want to know what information exists about it. Now, what they didn't know is when you make a subject access request, they are by law not allowed to delete the data. But of course, you make it direct to them. What they're going to do, they'll want to delete a few emails. So if you send it a copy the day before to the designated data controller, who's usually at district office level, you've got to find out who they are, send that to them recorded, say, a couple of days before, say, here's a copy of the complaint I've sent to the job centre manager or what have you. Then by law, they can't definitely delete anything. They'll get in touch with the person, and they then have to provide it. So if they embroil you in some sort of BS complaint, well, you can embroil them back and ask them to justify that. But one point I want to make, Mark, is that what I noticed about subject access requests is that whenever I made them, I had to make it sort of like 1, 2, 3 times, because this reframing is going on all the time. So like I would ask about specific things about the work program, sort of X, Y, Z, and they would just come back with, you have inquired and want a copy of, a very simplified X, Y, Z, or a very generic thing, or just a general thing, or they would just send you a big wodge of a database printout that was nothing to do with it. So you have to sort of try 2 or 3 times. But I wondered if you'd known about this, Mark, in that what they actually do is they just constantly reframe and disempower and try to make it as non-specific as they can. So you can't get that data. You'll get it in the end, but you've got to try sort of 2 or 3 times and say, no, I specifically want this, I specifically want that. Have you come across that before?
Absolutely. In dealing with local authorities, they do this all the time. What I would be interested in is, have you any idea how this training is going through Department of Work and Pensions and the civil service and at local authority level? Have you actually encountered how this training works?
Well, not really, but I do know for a fact that when I was back at the Flexible New Deal level and dealing with this district office manager, who is the head honcho for the district, he actually crops up on a common purpose trained database. So it got me wondering then, so like, what's going on with this guy? So it would seem that a lot of the significant people in significant roles do get this sort of aberrant training where they are trained to act obviously in the detriment of the claimant or the customer.
That's absolutely true, and we've uncovered this on numerous occasions. Anyone who's listened to the show will know this, and most people who have interactions with public bodies will know about this. And I think there's people out there, older people, who this is starting to hit now, who didn't have this interaction, but even with the National Health Service is happening, they kind of get bamboozled, and they don't understand what's going on because they can't believe how they're being treated. It's kind of beyond indignation. It's almost like puts them into shock,
You are you are taken, you'll have your complaint restated to you in a very simplistic kindergarten type way. And it seems to me the front shop is Job Centre Plus, the National Health Service, and the council. They're the 3 big local ones where you're getting this sort of kindergarten kid gloves treatment of like, yes, we'll try and help you, but we're not going to listen to a single word you're saying. Here's what you said, which is not what you said, but it's oversimplified, and this complaint's going to be buried if you want to go ahead with it. I did want to mention, actually, that I had one case with a manager who I think I played quite a big part in getting her moved on. And this manager actually just sent me a letter saying a doubt has arisen on your claim. And it appeared that on her last day in the job centre, she just made this up. And of course, I swung into action. Subject access request, you say this, okay, show me the data about it, because I genuinely didn't know what the hell she was on about. And of course it comes back, well, there's no data about this that exists, so we can't send you anything. Well, if it doesn't exist, what doubt are you referring to? You know, and it was just a complete load of BS that she was trying on to troublemaker. So it is a good defense technique, and it's also very good to obviously find out what they're doing with your data and how they're sort of caricaturing you and how they're treating you. But that concerned me quite a bit, in that I was being caricatured, and it's really this collusion that goes on. And to come on to the next bit of freedom of information, where this is where you can request data that they have about anything in the public interest. Again, if they're coming at you with some of their policies, or you know, you need to sign on to this, or you need to, let's say, universal job match or something, you can ask a freedom of information request. And I did that. I did that quite a lot. And originally, when I did that, it was the DWP Central Information Team, and they were very good. You could phone them up, you could write in, they would answer your question. Obviously, they hide all of this information, which prompts a lot of questions anyway. But then something changed, and they started dealing with it in a different sort of district, or they'd set up a job centre which seemed to deal with different areas or zones. And then freedom of information changed, because I started asking questions which were relevant to complaints I had at the time, or things that they were coming at me with. And of course, they wouldn't answer. And one of the things that I got back from them, there were two separate locations where I'd had questions. One, I think, was something like 11 or 17 questions. And there was another one where I'd asked about 50 questions, because I had about 5 complaints on the go, and I'd politely sort of group them all together. They weren't any big deal, but they were to sort of do with defending myself complaints. And I got an answer back from both locations saying I was vexatious. And what really got me was there was a cut and paste paragraph, or a couple of paragraphs on each of the letters from each of the locations, saying that you know, I'm known for making lots of complaints. It was quite derogatory, I have to say. You know, we've been informed that we've had to make special arrangements for you signing on and off, blah, blah, blah. Nothing to do with freedom of information. And it was obvious they had colluded on both locations, and these cut and pastes were more or less identical. So even in different locations across the country, they were colluding, and then they had obviously decided, well, let's just say this guy's vexatious. And then you don't get your freedom of information questions. I guess you've had some of that as well, Mark. I mean,
Absolutely. And what they tend to be doing is making legal determinations.
yes.
And these people are not legally qualified. I mean, if you're saying something's vexatious, you're really going into a legal argument, because it's not about anyone's opinion. It's about,
and they actually state that this, on it, this is not classed as defamation. And they're saying, well, you know, so you can't take legal action against us. It's nothing personal, sort of thing. Well, it is, because you're calling me vexatious.
Well, that's absolutely true, and that is what they're doing. And I think this is a very important point. We have the law on our side. The golden rule of law states that everybody is equal under the law and nobody is above it. And these people are acting as though they're above the law. And that is where we get them.
They're making a determination about you. And it, you know, I've got to be honest, I don't have these questions with me. I will do a video on it. I think
it's quite interesting, because we're sticking to the general points here, and these are the points that affect everybody. Like, every single complaint is being shut down, and you have found remedy within the system, and that's what we're trying to do on this show. So I think that's great.
Well, the thing, Data Protection Act with the subject access request, you can complain about that if they haven't complied, and you can complain to the Information Commissioner's Office, the ICO. Now they're a completely useless bunch of idiots, but they will actually say to them, well, you've got to answer this in time. Now the interesting thing that's different about freedom of information, which is it's like your sanction in that you can take it to a tribunal with a judge who's not a judge, he's a chair in a courtroom, but it's really a room. And you can do the same with freedom of information. So when I got this, it said on the bottom, you can take this to a tribunal if you want to. And it was the same sort of black and white letter as the sanction letter. So I thought, actually, I think I will, because it's bleeding obvious that these questions are pretty straightforward. I have a right via this legislation to these questions, allegedly. So I'll do that. But this, Mark, was a very interesting experience because it was delay. And then they sent me down to Newport in South Wales, of all places. So again, a courtroom, and there were 3 judges, and it was in quite a small room. It was quite weird. So it was poor little me sitting at the table in my scruffy clothes, and there were 3 judges sitting on the court bench. So I immediately put my hand up and said, look, this is a tribunal, isn't it? It said, yes, it's a freedom of information tribunal, don't worry. I said, well, you're sitting up there. Those are court seats. This is supposed to be a tribunal. You're supposed to be sitting on the same level as me. And they refused to come down, Mark.
That's extremely interesting.
And they were really antagonistic and negative, and it was obvious, Mark, that they had already decided. And they basically said, well, how do you want to proceed? And I said, well, I don't know how this proceeds. You're the judges, and how do you want to proceed? I will hold my hand up. This must have cost a pretty penny, because these judges had been shipped in from God knows where with their expenses and their big salaries. That's not my responsibility, but you know what I mean. It must have cost a couple of hundred or a few £100. And I said, well, basically, you can see that these are genuine questions. There's nothing vexatious about them. I genuinely want the answers to them. What can I say? And they were really antagonistic, shut me down. They refused really to listen to any of the points. They were like, this is about complaints, isn't it? I said, well, so what? They were bringing this complaint to me. I was asking an information about the policy, and it was very weird, Mark. And of course, I get the letter through saying they don't tell you the result immediately. Couple of weeks later, you get the letter saying, yes, you are vexatious. And I think, well, that's great. Thank you very much. And they even give you a further indignation. They put the result of it online with the reference number to say you're vexatious. So I just think that's beautiful, bit of corruption there, but very strange experience, that one.
Yes, and I've found this in the courts. What you said earlier on was very interesting, because the first tribunal you went to was a proper tribunal. Now,
well, the sanction ones are very easy,
yes,
and you shouldn't be afraid of them or intimidated at all. It's very straightforward, and he's on your side. He's a brains that can see through it in 10 seconds, so that's fine.
yes. And so when you escalate these things into something potentially more serious,
But freedom of information one, it was very strange, because I
yes,
felt like I was in a court on trial, and I'm sat there in my cardigan at this small table looking up at these 3 people with all their garb on. I'm thinking, what on earth is happening here? What have you got yourself into?
well, I suppose it's the difference between getting your entitlement and challenging the state.
I think the state had made the decision and say, well, we're going to send you 3 down to shut this guy up and make sure you insult him while you're there,
Yes.
So it was an establishment, dare I say, sort of stroke brackets whisper Masonic decision or something like that on behalf of the DWP that had already been sewn up. So where these people came from, I know not.
It's very interesting that, and that is indicative of, as we were saying earlier, every part of dealing with public bodies. And it doesn't matter whether it's the council, the DWP,
Yeah.
or anything which is to do with central or local government. So That's very interesting.
I should actually point out, Mark, there
Yes,
is obviously that site, the website, what's it called? What Do They Know?
yes,
And I'll be doing a video on that particular incident because I think it's just a very warped piece of procedure. I'll give the questions so the viewer can decide for themselves if they're perfectly reasonable questions, um, and I'll actually give the reference number so you can look online. But I might just see if those questions have been asked on What Do They Know anyway, because they tend to get answered. You know, people do make up bogus names, heaven forbid. They ask a question because it's in the public domain with a bit of transparency. Those tend to get answered. So I wonder if my questions would be answered.
that would be very interesting to find out. I've dealt with that site as well, and in a way, it's a gatekeeping site, but they do have to publish it, and you can find a lot of stuff up there.
And
And there's some
if you have
great,
a question, if you have a
yes,
question about Job Centre Plus, you could do a lot worse than search through that site first before you ask your question to find out if it's already been answered.
no, that's a really good idea.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so moving along then, so I mean, both of those things, subject access, request freedom of information, there's still good ways to protect yourself, and of course to find out information that they're trying to hide. But it's really their own counterproductive nature when they try and hide their own policies and procedures, but then refer to them to try to act against you.
That's absolutely right. So, moving swiftly on,
Yeah, I wanted to cover because we covered before about one of the things that interests me from early on about Flexible New Deal and the work program, where you go from Serco then to the providers like Working Links and A4E, bringing it all together with sort of data protection. I had an experience then with the new enterprise allowance scheme, which if the viewers hadn't heard, this is really like the self-employed option for longer term unemployed, where you have to be unemployed for, I think it's 6 months or more. Now, I wanted this scheme years ago, and I was told it was piloted, I couldn't have it, and then it was supposed to happen with Flexible New Deal, and the guy started to insult me, even though I'd never gone with the company. But this is also very interesting, Mark, because this is done by companies, the big companies, particularly A4E. Now, you'll obviously be aware that like Working Links and A4E, as far as I'm concerned, were criminal operations that were caught with their hands in the till, with their staff breaching data protection left, right, and centre to try to invoice the taxpayer and stealing God knows how much amounts of money. Are you aware of that?
yes, and people should probably be able to recollect that.
Yeah, and
And I
what
was
was
aware of it, yes.
interesting about that, Mark, is that they singled out, I think it was like 5, 7, or 9 individuals who were doing that, but not one person in the mainstream press said, "Hang on a minute, these are only underlings that were doing this. What have they got to benefit from it? Were they getting a bonus?" So somebody obviously was telling them to do that as normal procedure. So there were a lot of managers involved. So what was interesting about that is like there was no managers prosecuted. It was cross country. It wasn't just in one or two locations. It was happening elsewhere. And they did their own investigation, of course, which of course was a massive paper shredding exercise,
Yes.
where they must have had, God knows how many of these people. So it must have been like manager policy, area manager policy, telling them to do this to wrap up the invoices and to rip off the taxpayer.
Yes, and the public need to know that obviously that these people are agents of the DWP. That's
Yeah.
very important. They're acting as agents of the DWP.
And here's where the corporate bit comes in beautifully, because now I genuinely wanted to go on this. And the new enterprise allowance scheme, you can earn some money. They pay you £65 a week for the first 3 months, and then half that for the next 3 months, and then you don't get anything, and your business should be up and running. It's quite a badly designed scheme, but basically what you do, you have to have, the crux of it is you have to have a business plan, and to do that, you go to a voluntary not-for-profit organization, which some are very good, some are not so good, but they do presentations with managers and stuff like that. So far so good. So I actually went along to one of these, and it's free, but I was immediately shocked in the data that they wanted, because Data Protection Act says you only need to use the data that you need to do whatever service you're providing. So for this, they need your name and a phone number to contact you, or your address. Would you agree with that, Mark?
That's correct. Yeah.
But in order to get the funding, they wanted your national insurance number, your date of birth, quite a whole host of stuff, and then they wanted your a medical form as well. And now this was over the border just in Wales, and so all of this information was going to not only their company, but it was going to the Welsh Assembly, and then was going to Europe because it was funded by Europe. So you got all that data flying out the window. Have you heard of that before?
Oh yes, and this really ties into the bigger picture of what was known as Agenda 21, and
Yeah.
which is carrying on, obviously, with the Vatican getting involved with the UN. That's all coming up, and we're going to cover that on a show soon.
Right.
But
So
of course, this is part of the big society. The big society is really answerable to the EU, who are answerable
yeah.
to the UN.
So all of this is really going on from the EU point of view. Now I put my hand up and said, well, there's no asterisk by national insurance number, so you're not getting mine. I'm just giving you my name, and you can have a phone number or address if you want to. And that's it. And they said, fine, think, oh, he's Mr. Awkward. But everybody around me on the table was happily filling in their medical conditions and God knows what, utter ridiculousness. Anyway, had a bit of training. It was fine. Now I had a one-to-one with a guy on that voluntary company, not-for-profit company, and it was okay. It was pretty run-of-the-mill. He wasn't listening to a lot of my ideas, but I said to him, because there were about 3 or 4 people that were thinking of going on the new enterprise allowance scheme, and I said, well, what you do with that, you register at the job centre with your work coach. It's administered by A4E, and they then farm it out to a local sort of business advisor who is self-employed. And so I said, oh, do you deal with that person? And he said, oh, yes, we deal with that person all the time. But she was only here yesterday, and we were discussing all the cases. And I said, oh, well, she's actually a separate thing from this organisation. The organisation is not part of it. So I said, well, I hope you have the consent of those people, because obviously that's data protection. And he said, oh, yes, of course I do. And I could tell he hadn't even thought about it. Now, what actually happened with me is that I didn't know it was A4E that was doing the new enterprise allowance scheme, or administering it with the job centre. So they want a bit of information first, and they want your date of birth and national insurance number. So I said, no, if I meet this advisor, I am only going to give them what they need for the first meeting, my name and my address and telephone number, if that's enough. Because I might not sign up with them. Does that sound fair enough?
That's the point I think that we need to make to people. You weren't being awkward. You're basically, you do not have to divulge that sort of information to these people until you're actually under contract to them.
Yeah. Now, I misheard the guy, so I didn't realise it was A4E in control of it, because I regard A4E as a criminal enterprise, frankly.
Well, I think they've been caught, really, and the public can go and look into that for themselves.
Yeah,
yes.
and they're changing their name now, and they're rebranding them to sort of say we're not really corporate taxpayer raiders, criminal company, but they
anymore.
Yeah. So I when I found out it was them, what I actually did, I wrote to my work coach, and I wrote to A4E and said, I didn't realise it was you. I'm going to call a halt to this process, and I'm going to withdraw my data protection. So delete any data you've got, and you don't have my consent for one to talk to the other. And guess what happened is the first thing that both of them did when they received this, they pick up the phone and talk to each other. So I went in to see the work coach. At the time, he was quite a nice lad, but he said, oh yeah, I've just phoned so and so. And I said, well, what are you doing? I don't consent to that. I'm supposed to be having an appointment with you. My dealings with you are private. My data is private. My data is my property. And there you are picking up the phone, and I've just given you in writing saying you can't do that. He said, oh, well, I had to talk to him. And what was very interesting about that, it was like the A4E guy was in charge and he was taking his instructions from the A4E guy. So it was like the corporate part of it had just suddenly taken over. I just found that astonishing.
This is happening in all walks of life, especially these corporates are now basically mining all data, and it's all being sent back to government departments, circulated around private companies. So
Yeah.
that's no surprise. We know that there's no data protection for us. The data protection, when it's being quoted by these organisations, is usually against our interests. In the interest of data protection, we can't tell you that.
Yeah, and I said, well, okay. In the end, I said, okay, well, I'm quite willing to do it, but I'm not going to give you any unnecessary data. Like, if you're administering this process, you don't need to know my date of birth. You don't need to know my national insurance number. And they're saying, well, why don't you want to do that? I would say, well, you've just, lifted thousands of pounds off the taxpayer in a criminal enterprise. I don't want you doing it using my name. Thank you very much. You can use a reference number or something like that. And of course, they then say, and it turns out E4E are in charge. They say, well, you can't do the new enterprise allowance scheme because you're not prepared to give your data, which is not true. To add insult to injury, I mean, I shut these people down with no, I think it's called Section 10 notices, data protection, and they had to acknowledge that. But I then did a subject access request, and I found that even the work coach had lied to this advisor, saying, now, just at this moment, at that moment, I didn't have any telephone, and I would, even if you've got a phone, I would strongly recommend don't give the number or any details like that to the job centre. But I generally didn't have a telephone, and he'd rewritten the form, so I had 3 copies of a form where we'd written one together, saying no phone, blah 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 details. And then he'd redone the form again, saying this guy refuses to give his phone number, and he knew that I didn't have a phone, so he
Yes,
was even lying.
he'd reframed it.
He'd reframed it so that the relationship, even if I had met this advisor, had been corrupted from the word go. So the whole thing, the whole circular thing was where there were supposed to be separations, there weren't. They were colluding, and they'd reframed thing and basically damaged my relationship. So it's this thing about locus of control again. I'm not in control, and I can't create the impression I want to create because it's already been done, and already been done negatively with a negative caricature. And by the way, I'm not in charge. I'm just a profit unit. It's a classic example.
Oh, it certainly is. And I think you've made some really, really strong points throughout this interview. And I'd recommend that everybody who's having to deal with the DWP goes to your YouTube channel. So can you just tell us what it is again?
Yeah, well, if you go to YouTube and you just put Job Centre Corrupt or Job Centre Plus Corrupt, you'll see the Job Centre sort of kind of logo colours with the word corrupt, and the icon is a picture of all my paperwork on my table with a ruler over it to about half a metre. So I guess we'll. I mean, there's lots of other stuff to cover, like
Oh
the
yes, I was just saying for this section of
yeah.
the show, just to remind people to go to your
Yeah,
YouTube
yeah.
channel, which is full of
So
information.
you'll see my icon is just a pile of paperwork that I took. So I've decided to keep it, and I've decided to make this sort of ethnographic study, which I appreciate it's probably one of the most boring YouTube channels available, but it's quite interesting. So in 10 or 20 years' time, if this is still on there and they haven't taken it down, it will be an interesting study of like what was really going on then, what really went wrong. But what I want to say, Mark, is you've got they keep trying with these corporations from New Deal, Flexible New Deal, Work Programme, New Enterprise Allowance Scheme. They're trying to get them in so they can take over, and then they're going to try and implode the job centre and destroy it. And this is the point I want to get out. Is any staff listening? They're trying to do you out for a job. Do you really want to work for a criminal enterprise like A4E or Serco or even what's the security one, G4S?
Yeah.
You know, is that who you want as your boss? Because you can slag the job centre off all you want, but unless we save it and transform it, and along with all the other civil service departments, we're in for a very rough time. Because if the corporate takes over, everything goes out the window. There's no complaint process. There's no nothing. You are just a profit unit slave. You've got an opinion. Shut up.
Yes, I think we should get back to something called a labour exchange. That was a much fairer title.
Well, where they had cards with jobs on them, and you could say, "Well, I quite like this job." You walk up to the desk, and they phone the people up and say, "Yeah, let's arrange an interview for you." You know.
Yes, rather than these corporations. It's quite interesting what you were saying there, because I did some research into this several years ago. It just reminded me of something, that there was one job centre that was sending people to one of these companies on
Yeah.
their work program, and I found out from another job centre that the job centre that was sending these people to this company had no contract with them at all.
Yeah. So there was no health and safety, no hard hats, no protection, no public liability, no insurance on the premises, no nothing.
And I think this is where we start to win, because the incompetence and the fraud and laziness that goes on is where we can counter them. And that goes
Yeah.
through everything. All
But
walks of public life at the moment, with this corporatization, stealing of all your data, and the consensus society that means if you don't agree basically to be treated as a slave, then there's no place for you.
yeah,
I think
and
it's
you
Cameron's
won't
big
get the
society.
preferential place on the scheme that's quite good, you know.
Exactly, because the idea of the big society is that everyone's included. What that actually means is that everyone has to agree.
Yeah, and everybody's a slave and nobody has an opinion. Um, but you know, one of the things I've noticed, you know, because I'm quite observant chap in the job centre when I'm there, and it's they've chipped away at every single little process. So a classic example is like the universal job match. They've tried to corporatize the actual act of job searching. Universal job match is a great example because they always said it was mandatory from the word go. It never was. Then they said, okay, now it is really. It still never is. Um, you know, and it's such a bizarre thing. They actually want you to use this website, which is really monster.co.uk, and it's a crap job search. Um, they want you to use that, and they want you to give you access to that, but they want you to use the site, and anything else you do, and this could be a whole myriad of job center things. It might be 99% of your job search. They want you to stick that into a little category called other, you know, just so they can have a look at it. It's truly bizarre when they say, well, of all the job search things you could be doing, uh, you have to use this private site. It's really quite bizarre. Now, I don't use it, and when they say, have you looked at it, I'll say I'll look at it, but it's crap, so I don't use it. And I give them my job search on a spreadsheet, which they don't quite like, you know. But it's just quite a bizarre thing, and little things like that. And they've even got the digital signature pads now, which you know, you have to get in quick and say, I don't consent for you to look at my universal job match, and I don't consent to sign anything on the digital signature pad. Have you heard about the digital signature pad?
I think you should tell the viewers and listeners out there
Well,
what
I,
that's
I
about.
noticed a while ago my job centre, it had these little sort of light pads. Now, I know a bit about this from university because I thought, I bet this is for the signature, and then you're going to have software which will pattern recognize your signature. And sure enough, if you do it, you have to sign. When you sign on, instead of signing the piece of paper with a pen, you know, you have to sign this thing. Well, you don't have to. Um, you have to do it initially for 6 times, and that will train the pattern recognition to recognize your signature, and everything's hunky dory. And that's a great security measure to stop people signing on, uh, you know, posing as you, as if that would happen. And it's like, well, hang on a minute. You want me to give you a digital signature so basically you can sign and rubber stamp any single thing you want to for when the corporate thing takes over. So obviously I refused, and they're quite happy with that. But of course they're not telling people that they don't have to do it. They're just saying, well, this is the new thing. We'd like you to sign this. Now, please do it. And people just don't realize what they're giving away. You know what I mean?
That's right. They're not given the option to opt out. You actually have to look for that option once you're in. Yeah.
But I mean, this will mean that somebody can cut and paste your signature, you know, into all sorts of things, and that's really more quite serious, because I mean I have uncovered some serious little incidents, way back, going back to this work program thing, where they were trying to get an appointment for the work program at the same time that I was signing on. They actually, I found out that it was the job centre's job to organise the appointment with the third party provider, and one week they just forgot. And this would happen sometimes, or I'd be left alone for a month, so I'd have the odd break. One time they forgot, so they just went on the computer, and some bright spark just typed in, "Oh, he was sick, so he couldn't make that appointment." Now, that might seem quite innocent, but the thing is, on the line above it, I'm actually signing on, and I'm in the job centre, and it says what I was doing in the job centre that day. So, you know, one minute I'm not there and I'm sick, and then the other minute I'm actually there. But it's, I think that's a breach of the Computer Misuse Act, and also a complete breach of data protection. You know, this is really serious stuff that they are taking current legislation, which is supposed to be quite serious. It's supposed to be a criminal offence, and they're sort of urinating all over it, basically.
Yeah, they're getting you used to having no rights, basically,
Yeah.
and having to agree to everything, which is what I keep reiterating. But this is really what it's about, isn't it?
Yeah, and the other favourite of mine, I've just done 3 videos on customer compliance, where this is a very strange thing, in that they'll invite you to, well, they'll say they're coming to your house just to check the paperwork that they've already checked and already accepted at the job centre. But really, it's not the job centre, it's the DWP Fraud Investigation Service, even though there's no likelihood or you've done anything wrong at all. But they insist it's something that you have to do, and this is quite common. There's lots of things where they insist it's mandatory and you have to do it. And if you look at those 3 videos, customer compliance, you'll realise actually there's no obligation to do it at all. But they're just trying to wrap you up in obligations and requirements that don't really exist. And if you you fight them and ask them to document and verify, etc., you find out that there isn't any obligation and they don't exist. It's just trying to wrap you up in obligations and fear of not doing something, and then we will see if we can try it on and sanction you. And if you accept that, then we've won and you've lost, and they've committed their fraud. But they're just wrapping you up in this control mechanism, in this control grid, where, and what I think is going on is, I think with the unemployed, they've imploded the economy, and they've created a class of people that is just there, available to work, that will work for anything, because they've tried to get you into debt, under the thumb of the state, just to be there ready for any minimum wage crap they can throw at you when they need you.
Well, this is all about control, isn't it? It's about control of population, and of course, all the stuff that we've been talking about in Windows on the world for some time is about this control of population, how it's being implemented locally, and all of these things are done on, like you're talking about now, are done on implied consent. The
Yeah.
consent is implied, as you say. It's not mandatory.
But they will say it's
Yes.
definitely mandatory. That's the thing, and
Yes.
it never is.
Exactly. That's a really good point, and that's something that I was aware of quite a number of years ago, and I think it's one of the most important points.
Yeah, and the thing that's really, I mean, apart from the collusion thing, the thing that's really got to me is that when I was signing on and off, they were getting pretty outraged at doing this, and for me, it was just a practical thing to do, and it was like, how dare you? You're some sort of criminal. And when they would challenge me on it, I would say, look, this is my claim. I'm in control of my claim. If I don't want to claim anymore, I will decide that. If I suddenly want to claim or do a rapid reclaim 2 days later, it's my claim. What is so wrong with that, taking control of my claim? And they're like, well, you're obviously up to something. It's like, well, you know exactly what I'm doing, and it's because you're doing what you're doing. I wouldn't do it if you stop doing what you're doing. They'll stop doing what I'm doing. I'm just trying to defend myself. But they just couldn't get this concept of, I mean, I'd like to be in charge of my own life, if that's all right with you.
Yes, and we're talking about an entitlement here.
Yeah.
It's not actually a benefit. It's an
No,
entitlement.
you've
All
already
you're
paid.
doing is going there to claim your entitlement.
you've paid your tax, you've paid your national insurance. This is another thing. You're treated as if it's your fault the economy is like it is. Well, it's not necessarily all of my fault, is it? It might be the percentage of one person in how many millions fault, you know. But you're made to feel this peer pressure or this almost criminality as if you failed in some way, whereas actually, you know, you didn't implode the economy and the local jobs that are available, and you know, nothing to do with you unless you're an entrepreneur, you know.
Well, that's exactly right, and I think we've covered some really, really good points there. And I would encourage people to go to your YouTube channel for essential information on how to deal with this stuff, because it's never been more important in history that people start to realise that they have to start enforcing their own rights rather than getting trampled all over and
And
controlled by these corporations.
And can I say, you've got the corporate Agenda 21 moving in, but you've also got quite an onslaught in terms of media, in that we are being demonized in the mainstream media. It's just gone hell for leather. The BBC, ITV, and particularly Channel 4 and Channel 5 have joined the party now, where they make the most ridiculous programs that everybody's a scrounger, everybody's got 20 kids, everybody's stealing from the state and trying to pull one over on the state. The solution to Job Centre Plus is not difficult, but you've got the mainstream media going hell for leather with this propaganda exercise. And I have to say, Mark, I mean, I quite respect your channel, but the alternative media as well needs to really wake up in this nuts and bolts stuff is really where it's happening.
I agree
And
entirely. I absolutely agree, and that is what I'm trying to do with this channel. And I think that's why we get a lot of disruption, and I stay away from these sensational nonsense stories that are put
yeah,
into alternative media, because
yeah,
alternative media is being controlled just as
yeah.
mainstream media is. People have to wake up to that.
I mean,
And
I do understand that Job Centre Plus, people being sanctioned, it's not ultra sexy, and it can be quite a bit boring if people prattling on about it. But what's actually going on in the manipulation of the front house stuff, like the Job Centre, the NHS, like the council particularly, is very interesting. And this is happening right on your doorstep, right in your locality.
absolutely, and the thing is, it's the bigger picture.
Yeah,
People get little bits of the picture, but if they can try and put the bigger picture together, this is just overall about global control of your information and all of your business.
yeah,
So basically, we're being pushed into a consensus society, the big society, which
yeah,
excludes nobody,
yeah,
but it excludes anybody who disagrees with it. So
yeah.
nobody's left out of the big society. We can all be in it, but
And and
do we
and
want to be in it?
And also, you know, you've got people who work at the job centre who are good people that they know they're going along with an agenda that they really don't agree with. And you've got people, you know, my policy is I don't go gunning for people. You've got sort of, you know, the assistant manager, the department head, or the job centre manager. They're following the script. They think they're doing a good thing, but really they know what they're doing is wrong. And it's just the fact that it's not designed to provide genuine help or support. You could change it overnight by bringing in, get rid of everybody. You can go in and use their facilities and just have a couple of people there that are genuine, really clued up recruitment specialists to help you. You just turn up a morning every 2 weeks, or you can have a day a week, whatever you like. There's tea and coffees there, there's sofas there, you can meet employers. You know, it's not rocket science to make something that would actually work. But what they're actually doing is just to make problems, to make invoiceable things, and bring the corporate agenda in.
That's absolutely right. You've made a very good point there, that what they could do is they could have like open evenings for people with a certain skill set with local
Exactly.
businesess.
Make
And
it
those
work.
sort of things are hugely beneficial.
And you have the food bank there, right there as well. This is another real bugbear of mine. I have, I live in the countryside. I've got two polytunnels, Mark. I've got a ton of tomatoes now. Last year, I tried to take tomatoes into the food bank, and I was shocked because I said, I just made a sort of say, so well, I'm not very well off myself. I actually qualify for the food bank. I'm unemployed. So maybe I could have a little something in exchange,
Yeah,
and I'll offer you this tray of ultra fresh tomatoes picked today,
yeah.
which is going to be really nutritious for a few people. And they said, well, you can't have anything because you haven't been approved by the job centre. And for heaven's sake, so you had to get permission for they've driven you into poverty, probably sanctioned a lot of people, driven you into poverty. You're close to starvation. You've got to get permission from the job centre to go to a food bank. It was unholy. So I just, got up and said, right, you're not having my tomatoes. Get lost. I'll find another food bank.
Absolutely, because they could have turned around and got, wait a minute, we've looked you up. You're vexatious. Get out of here now before you cause any more trouble. And take your tomatoes with you. Because
Yeah.
you grew those tomatoes, didn't you? You're not allowed to grow your own food. You have to be dependent on the state. And also, we don't know what's in those tomatoes because they're not from a mainstream
Nutrition.
supermarket.
Nutrition, that's what's in them. These are too nutritious for the unemployed. I'm sorry.
That's right. They don't contain any pesticides whatsoever. They could be dangerous.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, I think I'm done for this one, Mark.
That's great. No, thanks. That was brilliant information. And I hope you'll come back on the show again with some updates because this is essential information for people out there. And maybe this will get through to the people who need it. So, JC Plus from
Yeah.
JC Job Centre Corruption is your channel, isn't it?
Job Centre Corrupt. Go on YouTube. If you're not interested, don't bother. It's quite boring, but it's quite niche interested. Please subscribe and please comment. Give me lots of comments. Let's build up other people's experiences there as well. I'm only halfway through my videos, so give me a chance to get the rest on, and then I'll get some self-help ones on there as well.
Well, I think it's great that what you're doing, and I would recommend everyone go to your channel who needs to, and more people are needing to. So thanks very much for being on Windows on the World, JC, from the Job Centre Corrupt channel on YouTube.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching Windows on the World. Remember, keep watching those, watching us, watching Windows on the World, and we'll see you soon.